We are on live. Welcome everyone. I'm here with Cam. We're going to give everybody a few moments to kind of come on online. We usually do this at seven p.m. on a weekday. Sometimes we mix it up, like yesterday. Wanted to work around school board member Mike Morosky and his schedule, so we did it earlier in the day. But we're on at 7 today, so we'll give it just a minute here. Cam, how you feeling over there? How are you hanging in there during COVID-19, Corona, and all of this nonsense?
Let me tell you, man, I've actually been kind of enjoying this time to relax. I don't think I've done this in years. I haven't had this much downtime in a long time. But also, man, my allergies are kicking my butt. So,
Is that right?
uh, yeah, that's why I'm all swole up in the face, man. I'm plugged up.
Oh, that's
Allergies are kicking me. But other than that, I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, man. Hanging in there. It's just a weird time. But I agree with you, and we'll talk a little bit more about it because I know you are. Dude, you're busy. You're everywhere. Obviously, busting an ass on issue 7. And up until now, like being an activist is another full time job besides your job. But I agree with you. I think it's a same kind of thing, like this kind of reconnecting at home. Obviously, it's just me and Josie over here, so in that way,
Mm.
not a lot's changed. Is folks at home with the kids, and everything's kind of crazy, and trying to homeschool everybody and all of this. But I don't know. I kind of feel like there's going to be like a little reconnection. Even like the cook. I've been posting my cooking pictures. More people kind of eating in and just kind of
I've been enjoying those, by the way.
yeah. What's that?
I've been enjoying those, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty tasty stuff. And then you see, gee, I'm buying rice in bulk. It's pretty inexpensive. Helps my wallet. But anyway, yeah, with that, we've got some people joining us. So let's go ahead and kick it off. First of all, thanks, Cam. Thank you for joining me here. And again, anybody listening to us, if there's any issues with the audio or the video, I actually got a new mic. So hopefully I sound a little better. I don't know. But kind of the theme that we've been working on here is reaching out to people in Cincinnati and across the region that are people of interest. And one of the things that we don't hear about because we see what folks are up to or how we see them. We've had some elected officials and other community leaders on. And so we see them, but we don't always know like the backstory. And that's super interesting to me what the backstory is, how you got here, why you're so passionate about Metro and public transportation in Cincinnati, and really all over because you're traveling now, doing stuff. Folks are having you in to speak at different groups, and you're doing research and obviously online, but in person as well. So yeah, I know you're Cincinnati, and then we'll talk about how we met, but. I know you're a Cincinnati native, born and bred. So just like give us some history, Cam. Just tell me about coming up, what that was like, and why you're so passionate.
Yeah, well, man, thanks, D, for having me, and thank you to everyone who is tuning in. And for me, I grew up and I split between two neighborhoods of College Hill and Avondale. My father uh, when I was younger. My father stayed in Avondale. When I got older, he moved to the West Side. I'd say when I was probably like in the 10th grade, he moved to the West Side. But growing up as a kid, I was in Avondale, and then my mother stayed in College Hill. So I split between the two neighborhoods. Um, you know, if you would have told me when I was 19 years old that I would start a coalition and like build this whole movement and get people fired up about public transportation, I would have laughed at you, man. Because honestly, I feel like being an activist for me just really fell out the sky. Growing up, I mean, like when it comes to elections and voting and stuff like that, saw my mother vote. You know, but outside of that, I really was not in tune about what was going on until I got older. But growing up, I didn't know anything about it. But I did know one thing, D, and what I did know is that I love riding a bus. I started riding a bus. I think my mother let me ride it. She might be tuning in. Might be this number might be wrong, but 7 or 8. years old is when I first rode the bus, and
On
like,
your own. You were going on your own at that age?
yeah, oh yeah,
Oh
and it
yeah.
wasn't far. It was not far. My mother,
Turned you
she
loose.
rode the bus. Yeah, well, my mother rode the bus too, and so like she uh she worked downtown, so she had to go the opposite way, whereas I had to go to school. So
Right.
I was going to school. Most days I would walk with my friends to school, but there were some days that I would catch the bus to school. I went to Pleasant Hill. We lived in College Hill. I went to Pleasant Hill Elementary. So sometimes I would catch the bus. And so, man, that's where my passion started. I mean, I just really liked it. Um, the bus driver was really nice. I got to know her over years and years, and continue to ride the bus and see her. And so, just build those relationships, and I would say that bus operators are some of the most forgotten about people but they do so much, and just at a young age being able to experience that was very exciting for me. People always ask me, have I owned cars? The answer is yes, I have. But most of them was worthless at the end of the day. It took a lot of money out of my pocket. I was living in crappy places because I was trying to prop up a car that I really couldn't afford. And so, after high school and everything, I went to Woodward Elementary. I said Woodward Elementary, but Woodward High School. And you know, uh, after that, I got a job doing security downtown, and I ditched my car and just started riding a bus. Again, you know, uh, just even more, than when I was younger. So,
Right.
and so this is where I'm at now. I mean, I still ride it to this day. I
Yep.
don't own a car today,
Which
but
is actually how we met. Because as most people know, I live in over the Rhine, and so somehow I'm just walking downtown doing whatever, and ran into you when you were working security, like you mentioned, at a couple different buildings down here. And it always seems like we were crossing paths, and we just kind of struck up a conversation. And obviously public transit has been a passion of mine as well. And so we just started like just two guys just kind of rapping about, and I was interested to hear like your experiences at that time. I still had a car. I've since been car free for about a year and a half now. But hearing experiences of somebody who relied upon it every day, and you really, even at that early moment before you kind of became world renowned Cam Hardy. uh,
post
you were helping to like kind of solidify my thinking, along the lines that I was thinking about these same issues. And then just kind of going on, you took that to the next level. But just right off the bat, I mean, you mentioned a couple things that I jotted down here. And one of those is, and that's a very interesting point that you mentioned, as a young boy riding public transit, and you see that maybe not to the same degree in Cincinnati and some of the other cities that have more robust systems. The kids just grow up just using it, and it's just a thing. And really, that's how people ask me how I got into it. That was the thing. I remember growing up in Cleveland, riding with my dad into downtown, as some of my earliest memories. And so it was just something that we just utilized. It wasn't even a thing, And you would see that. You would see young people, going downtown for the evening, and so there's a freedom. There's a freedom that that it provides, not only for kids, but for everybody, in the freedom from being shackled to that car payment, like you mentioned, which they are so expensive in ways that sometimes we don't even realize.
Yeah, man, and even like I said, after high school, like before I got the security job, I was working at McDonald's, and I mean, imagine trying to keep up a hoopty working at a minimum wage job. It's
Right,
just not feasible. If you want, if you value a high quality of life, and I mean like, in terms of like where you live. Some people don't have a choice, man.
right,
And so like I just feel like shit in that car helped me out tremendously. And now I'm able to save a lot of money,
right,
and I'm able to, whereas when I was younger, I wasn't able to particularly live where I wanted to. Now I can live where I want to because I have basically I save a lot of money.
right.
Oh,
And there's so many different angles to that. Like one of the issues that we face here in Cincinnati, and all of this stuff kind of ties in, and I think people don't always connect the dots. But so, for example, housing affordability. So
Yeah.
we have that issue. But if I'm not locked into having a car payment of at least a few $100s a month, plus plates and insurance and gas, which those prices are down now a little bit, but it's probably going to go back at some point. And all the other things that we don't even, oil changes, maintenance. My alternator went out. Especially when you're driving, you're forced to drive older cars. Are not reliable, and it becomes so expensive. And so that this public transit angle feeds also into the housing affordability angle, that I can afford more house or a house if I'm not locked into that car payment. Even if you're somebody that could afford to own a car, if you're not having that $400 a month on your debt, that allows you maybe a little more mortgage to be able to get and still have your numbers and your ratios work out. So that's a great example you point out.
Yeah, man. It's I look at it as freedom. I mean, but to another point, as far as public transportation, and I feel like this kind of segues into what really fired me up with it is, the perception around it. Like, I know for me, like, I ride it, it's healthy for my quality of life, helping the environment, it's convenient, but, the people the powers that be per se, and how they view public transportation. I mean, even historically here in Cincinnati, it's historically been underfunded. As I mentioned earlier, our bus operators are forgotten about. And it's just kind of been, our bus system has been kind of left dormant for a very long time. And so, D, you saw me at a time where buses was breaking down every other day, and that's no exaggeration.
No, we saw it, and you would be posting photos from here we are again. Air conditioning doesn't work. It's 100 degrees in here. The bus is broken down, and I'm over there saying, we're MacGyvered together. It's literally duct tape and popsicle sticks holding these things. And let's talk about that a little bit why here in Cincinnati. And I think kind of on background, I think nationally in the U.S. in general, I mean, you have some of the big cities, are one thing, but just as a general rule, it's never been something really valued like it has in Europe, or in Asia, places like that. And so we've had this car culture that's, come out of the 50s and just carried on, and that's where the resources go for that mode of transportation. And then, the state of Ohio, I think most people are familiar with how we're the sixth or seventh most populous state and 44th in transit funding, which is backwards, is crazy. But here in Cincinnati and in Hamilton County, in this region, it's kind of been the same thing. And we've been working on this temporary, quote unquote, temporary funding model since like 1972 or 73. And that's really what brought us to this crisis point. So can you just kind of touch on that? Like, what's the model? How is Metro currently funded, and why isn't that working anymore? Why is this so critical?
Yeah, man, you hit the nail on the head. So since 1972, well, even before that. So let me give you a quick history lesson on this. This is fascinating stuff to even research.
Right.
Before Metro was Metro, Cincinnati Metro used to be called Queen City Metro, and it was private. It was a private entity. Someone owned it. Well, this private person who owned it, they tried to raise fare at an enormous rate. The city bought it from them, and the city established a way for them to pay for it temporarily through what we call our earnings tax. So right now, we pay, if you work in the city of Cincinnati, you pay 2.1 earnings tax to the city if you work inside the city of Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. 0.3 of your 2.1 goes to Metro. That's written into the charter. And as Dee mentioned, that is a temporary way. That was at the time billed as a temporary way to fund our bus system. because theoretically, um, if you have a bus system that goes beyond the city limits, then it should be a more regional way to pay for it.
Right.
And so, at the time, our leader was like, okay, we're going to go back and put this on a ballot countywide, and let the voters decide. That they did, and it failed. It failed about 5 times over our history, over since '72, um, with the latest being in 2002 when Metro moves.
Right. And that was a time in the 70s when a lot of these systems that were private, just became unfeasible, untenable. And so we saw, for example, in the city of Cleveland, actually Cuyahoga County passed a 1 cent sales tax to support Cleveland RTA in 1977, I believe it was. It was a full penny just for transit in Cuyahoga County that's been in place there for what, 40, almost 35, 40 years. Yeah. And so we've been operating under this deal where it's kind of unfair to the city of Cincinnati and residents here when there's just an earnings tax in this small area that's supporting what's supposed to be a metro, that's what we call metro, right? A metro type of a system. And then it's just gotten to the point, and it's been the same 0.3 since forever. And obviously costs go up over time. Healthcare costs go up over time. People get raises over the course of a half a century. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at a point right now where it could be in the next 2-3 years. Or what's the budget outlook for Metro if it just stayed as it is right now? That it's a crisis, right?
Yeah, next year they're facing $30 million deficit off the rip. And that's before, of course, this pandemic that we're in.
Right.
Because they're going to take a loss off of this as well. It could be catastrophic for and that's not an exaggeration, for our transit system, due to this very outdated way that we pay for transit. You said, and I did not know this, D, you said in the 70s they passed a sales tax?
In Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland, and the Cleveland area passed a 1 cent sales tax that's been, now they're talking about what else could we do, because that's starting to, be outmoded at this point for the things they want to do up there. But yeah, they've had up there they've had a sales tax in place for this, for this long. It's even bigger than the one we're looking at, and we can talk more about issue 7 here in a little bit. But not all of that's even going to Metro. Part of it's going to road stuff.
Exactly.
So I think when you look at, and a lot of people don't realize they talk about taxes, which nobody really wants to pay more taxes, but it's the way it works. You get some benefit for that. And so, most of, after 2010 and the last economic crisis we were in, most of the larger cities across the state, like Cleveland, Columbus, and Toledo, and some others, most of them are at 2.5% on the earnings tax that just goes to the city. So in Cleveland, you've got a 1 cent sales tax for Cuyahoga County just for transit, and you've got a 2.5% earnings tax. And here in Cincinnati, we're at 2.1 total with 0.3. So, and then if we have the sales tax, which the 0.3 gets done away with, so that's just down to 1.8. So a lot of people actually get a tax cut on the earnings tax. And then the 0.8 on the sales tax is still less than a peer county like Cuyahoga County in the same state. So, yeah.
Well, and I also want to say this, I find it fascinating that Cuyahoga County did this at a very early stage. Cincinnati and Toledo are the only 2 cities in Ohio that do not fund their transit systems by sales tax. And Toledo funds theirs by property tax. Can you believe that? 2 different millages of property taxes that go to their transit authority. Now they're paying close attention to Cincinnati, of course, with issue 7, because they too want to move to a sales tax because it's outdated. The way that people are paying for transit is just outdated. It's not bringing in enough money. And, I always say this, I give a lot of credit to our transit agency, Cincinnati Metro. Daryl Haley is doing a great job over there. The leadership is doing a good job. They are doing a lot. They're running a lot of service with pennies, and
And there's actually studies that have been done to back that up, right? People say, well,
yeah,
cut the fat,
yeah.
cut the fat. I don't know what this, I want somebody to show me what that fat is that they're supposed to cut. It's easy to say that, but the reality is, and the studies have been done that shows that Metro is one of the most well-run organizations, transit organizations in the country in terms of bang for your buck, doing more with less because they've been in this situation for so long.
Yep. And like I said, I credit that to the wonderful leadership over there. So imagine what our transit system could look like if we gave them more money and we actually made that way that we pay for it more equitable.
Right. And one thing I wanted to touch on, so there's that. I just wanted to give people a sense of the fact that what's being asked for here is not like some crazy number. Now, if you want to look at the total sales tax picture in Hamilton County, and you say, well, that would put us when it passes, it's going to put us at near the top, not at the top, but near the top of other counties in Ohio. By the same token, not all of them have a half a cent going to the stadiums, a half a cent going to, that's now in empty stadiums. There's a white elephant sitting down there, Paul Brown Stadium, that's used 8 times a year or 10 times a year with 2 preseason games, and our sales tax is going to that. So this isn't the transit's not the real the issue. It's something that's used. What's the ridership on Metro? And I know those numbers have gone up and down over the years, but it's tens of millions of rides, right?
Yeah, so 22 million per year.
What's the number?
22 million per year.
22 million rides a year versus 10 times a year. Now, in terms of bang for your buck and value, I mean, I'm no math whiz, but that seems pretty clear. That seems pretty clear cut to me, right? And we can get into all the other benefits and things like that. But I just want people to have a clear understanding because I don't think they do. And there's also opponents tend to use like mis and disinformation campaigns to kind of muddy the waters. And so people don't understand. So what are we looking at with issue 7? That's a 0.8% sales tax, correct? Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So not even a full cent that Cleveland and Cuyahoga County has. And then what's this breakdown look like? I hear about some of it is going to roads. What's that breakdown? So how's that supposed to shake out?
Yeah, so 100 million of it is going to Metro, and they're going to implement the Reinventing Metro plan, which is on reinventingmetro.com. But it calls for a very expansive upgrade to our bus system, 24-hour bus system, more crosstown, more county routes, circulator routes, all kinds of stuff. BRT and 2 corridors starting with.
What's that for people that don't know? BRT. What's that gonna look like? What's that mean?
Yeah, great point. So BRT is bus rapid transit, and what it is, it's rapid with buses. It's rapid on wheels. It gets its own lane. It gets its own right of way, and it has very special bus stops along corridors. The service is usually frequent. People like to look to the Health Line in Cleveland as an example of something that's BRT. And so, yeah, stuff. So you would see stuff like that in the Reinventing Metro plan. So that's 100 million, 30 million of it is going towards roads and bridges that buses ride on. So there's been a study that's done. There's a lot of overlap with our bus system versus needs across the county. And so municipalities will then be able to bid for these dollars, as well. So I was in Lincoln Heights a few weeks before, the shutdown of the state. And, the 78 goes right in the heart of their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
and that road hasn't been paved fully since the '80s. So this is a direct side street in their community that they'll be able to pave, and they're not going to be able to afford that. I mean, they can't fund 100% of the bill to be able to pave the road. No municipality can. So these funds will be able to help municipalities match what they'll be able to bring to the table to be able to get the roads paved.
And that's a great point you bring up. And one of the things I like to remind people about, especially our friends on the west side of Cincinnati and the west side of Hamilton County, that we've been looking for a funding model to replace the Western Hills Viaduct, which I don't think there's anybody who's going to argue that the Western Hills Viaduct is a major need, but nevertheless, it's a $350 million, a third of $1 billion project. And so they've been cobbling together, the state gives us another $12 million grant or something, and they've been banking all this in a little piggy bank. But at the end of the day, there's a huge gap there. And where's this money going to come from? Meanwhile, as pieces of it continue to fall off and whatnot. This will be an opportunity, and it's not written into the language, but I don't think there's anybody in Hamilton County who would probably run you out of here on a rail, so to speak, if that money is not dedicated towards Western Hills Viaduct at some point, and as you mentioned, other road projects, as long as it's related to where the buses go, which are most in Cincinnati. It's a large percentage of our streets, and outside of the city, it's a large percentage of the major thoroughfares that would be eligible for this. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And a part of that infrastructure is, better bus stops, better shelters, better lighting, crosswalks, things like that. These dollars will be eligible for those kinds of things too. So that's really important to mention as well.
Right. No, and that's a great point. And probably we're doing a whole other segment about Vision Zero and reducing crashes and pedestrian safety, all that stuff that we both are very concerned about. But obviously, then if you're repaving a street, or if you're repaving then if hopefully the crosswalks and all of that, and we'll work to advocate and activist on that as well, that when they do it, it's done the right way. And
Yep.
we know with all the CPS kids that have gotten hit and everything else. I mean, this is just a whole other angle of a benefit to this that we might not even think about.
I agree, man. I
Yeah.
agree.
And then I just also want to follow up on your BRT comment, because a little bit of the commentary that I heard even from like transit folks was say, well, there's not a whole lot of bells and whistles to this. But I would encourage everyone to go on the website. We'll drop it in the comments for the Reinventing Metro Plan on the website, so you can see more what that looks like. But BRT is really cool. And it's, you're talking about, and you mentioned bus stops, and I've stood out there in the rain, people trying to get to work and they're getting drenched, and kids going to school getting drenched, and it's snowing and blowing and this and that. So if we want to make this system, and we often talk about it as, really helping, low income folks, what we call the riders of necessity. But
Right.
there's this whole other angle of riders of choice, right? People like me that could have a car that choose not to, and as living downtown, it's a little bit easier. But if you're talking about helping our neighborhoods across the city, and taking some of those dollars that's going in people's gas tanks and going to Saudi Arabia, wherever it goes, and keeping those in our local economy that they can spend at local businesses that they could use to upgrade their housing situation, and choose to give up their car because now it's this system is sufficient. I mean, when you go to other cities and you see something as simple as just having nice, bus stops with some kind of shelter, and what we got here, it's embarrassing. I mean, it's not only embarrassing, it's just bad and wrong for our people. Like, you should not be subjected to that. It's almost like third world. It's even worse than third world countries, because I've traveled around here and there and experienced these systems places, and it's way better in other places, and it's just crazy to me.
No, man. I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, you've been out the country to experience it, as well, which is fascinating too, just to see, their mentality around transit. And I think, again, going back to a point that I made earlier, it's just how the perception of it is so different.
Right.
Depending on where you're at. I like to spend a lot of time down in Atlanta. I got some family down there, and all walks of life take the MARTA, take the rail, take the bus. You see everyone doing it. It's not anything that's taboo. Here, it's kind of taboo. So
And
we
I
have to
think
figure
to
out a
the
way to make it cool.
yeah, and well, exactly, and it sounds kind of goofy to say maybe, but it's actually true. I mean, if it wasn't to be quite frank, if it wasn't so shitty, more people would do it. You have increased ridership. Now these people are bought in. They're now supporters because they're engaged on the issue. And so all of this, and then just for the single mom or whomever is just trying to get to work, it's benefits across the board. And I wanted to circle back. I think this is a very key. I know that a lot of people tuning in here that are concerned about things from a social justice perspective. So there is this concept where we want to improve the service, make it better so people can choose to give up their cars. But for people that don't, most of the folks listening here would, recall that I was a police officer in Mason for a long time. And I would literally experience what you were talking about driving a hoopty because we have employers up there like Cintas and some others that have that employ people making 12, hopefully $15 an hour. But a lot of times they were Cincinnati residents, and I would run into them somehow. The car would be broke down, or maybe it's got all kind of problems, and so I'm on a traffic stop, and I'm running into the folks, and they're driving like a '92 Taurus, trying to get up here to work because we've had job sprawl out to the suburbs, like we've had population sprawl. And so, I was the only cop there, and other places where it'd be Sharonville and other places around the region where there's jobs, or we can even touch on the whole concept of, the jobs that are Amazon and others occurring around the airport now, and how hard it is to get right over there. It's a short distance away, but it's another state, and that gives us a whole other set of problems here. But just this idea that people are trying to get in a car. Oh, they couldn't afford their insurance last night. Now they're driving without insurance. Their license gets suspended. Next thing you know, they get a ticket for something, one of those, or they're driving under a suspended license. Now they couldn't afford any of that. Now they can't afford to pay the ticket. Now they're getting a warrant out for their arrest for failure to pay, failure to appear, and all of a sudden this becomes a law enforcement in a criminal justice issue. Well, it's just somebody trying to get to work. And now they get a warrant. Now they're arrested. And if the car's still running, the car's towed. And it creates this whole, there's a whole domino effect. And when you have folks that are living, literally paycheck to paycheck, if it's you or I, we can probably adjust or overcome some little thing that goes wrong. But for them, it's like, what do I do? It's like my world is crumbling around me. It's earth shaking.
And that's why, with people have so much going on in their life and, going on around them, especially, in these tough times that we're facing right now.
Right.
And that's why I think, that government should be providing the basic service of decent public transportation. No one is asking for limousine service. No one is asking for, the house by house service or anything like that. Just some decent service, that people can depend on and rely on, and that's good for everybody, and not just certain people.
Right. So. Well, we're seeing that right now. I've been making this point. We're finding out, and it's unfortunate that it takes a crisis like this that we learn who our critical workers are, right? Our critical workers are people working at CVS, Walgreens, Kroger right now. So even people in a janitorial staff position where they're, have to clean everything extra and all of this stuff. We're now learning, I mean, some of us knew, but that these are our actual critical workers who rely by a much larger degree on public transportation. And we're seeing that now more than ever. And I also think there's this economic piece that coming out of this, we're going to need to have these investments to fuel jobs, connected jobs. What's the number? 50,000 jobs in Hamilton County is that right? Can't be.
70,000 jobs unreachable by bus in our city. That's just the city.
So we want people. You say, "Well, get a job, buy a car." Well, maybe I would. I can't get to the job, and so it's a chicken or eggs scenario. Can you touch on this and just kind of dovetailing off of that a little bit with, we've got all these with Amazon, DHL, some of the other employers that are really sprouting up around the airport. Which the fact that the airport's in Kentucky, I think speaks to our long history of very short-sighted transportation decision making here in the city of Cincinnati, where we're dilly-dallying and dragging our feet, and it ends up over there. It should be over here, but that's for another show probably. But having said that, if I want to get to my job at Amazon and I live, I don't know, let's say Roselawn or someplace like that, how do I get to the airport? Like, what's that process look like, and since it's a whole other system over there, but I can see it, but it's a totally different thing. How does that work, or how do people try to manage that?
Man, it's tough because, as you indicated, it's a whole different system. I will say this: their fares slightly cheaper, but I mean the service is just as if not worse. I take the bus over to Northern Kentucky all the time. I particularly like taking that airport bus, but here's the thing: it is specifically designed for workers. It is not designed for people that are commuting in and out of the airport or anything like that. It is designed around those shifts at the airport. And I mean, again, it goes to mentality, and how much funding we put into the system. But, it's extremely difficult to get from Roselawn to the airport out to a job, or to Amazon to a job. You got to spend 40 minutes in Cincinnati going from Roselawn to downtown. Then you got to spend an additional 10 minutes downtown waiting for the tank. Then you got to spend 30 minutes on that bus. So, hour and a half, just, what I mean? Like, it's insane.
Yeah,
It's really,
it's just crazy. And flying out of CVG, I've taken it. Another thing, and I think this speaks to a bigger picture that most or a lot of people are concerned about, just in general in this region. I think people are starting to talk a little bit more again. We'll see if it gets any traction, but some type of a metro government or sharing services somehow. But it's just one of these other things where, it's the east side versus the west side. It's the downtowns versus the suburbs. It's always, and I think a lot of times the powers that be use that term kind of pit, because if you can keep people compartmentalized, it kind of keeps them at bay, and you can control this or that. But we've got a whole other state over here, and so are they doing some things to work to make the systems, work together? And I think just as a general rule going forward, because you got the city and the county arguing about this and that, you've got CPS arguing and council arguing about this and that. Are there some opportunities to where, because that airport bus only runs twice an hour, or every 30 minutes? Are they starting to work together and play nice a little bit? And what more can we do in that regard?
I will say that the level of enthusiasm and collaboration between Tank and Metro is at an all-time high. It's probably the highest that I've ever seen since I've been following this issue. The leadership in both respective places are great. And I do see a lot of collaboration. I mean, you got the app, the transit app, where you could pay for your fare right there on the app, but you could also pay for Tank. You could pay for Butler County. And so I feel like those small steps are steps in the direction of making our public transportation truly regional. Because trust me, I mean, let's face it, just Hamilton County is not regional. That is not the definition of a region. I mean, yes, our county is big, but our transportation network needs to be much bigger than just Hamilton County. But I do like the steps that the transit agencies are taking to collaborate more and work together more, as far as scheduling goes and using apps together, and just those kind of basic things, I think will help us in the future when we're ready for truly regional transit.
Right. No, that's good info. I want to circle back a little bit and talk a little bit more about just you personally. And like I said, I've got the scrolling ticker down here. Vote yes on issue 7. Clearly, we're both supporting that. I saw a stat today or yesterday that said there's still 55,000 ballots outstanding, roughly, in Hamilton County. So if you've got your ballot already, there's only a few days left. If it's sitting on the kitchen table under a stack of mail, get your ballot. Please vote yes on issue 7 for all the reasons that we've outlined, and send that in to the BOE. But as you kind of went from, just the guy working security, and then kind of made a name for yourself and an advocate, and especially when you're talking about supporting a tax issue, that kind of opens yourself up. And I've certainly over the years been subjected to it. And some of our folks that we know that are elected officials deal with this every day with some of the craziness on social media, especially Twitter. What's been, and also tell us a little bit about how, some of the advocacy, and I know you've gotten some recent, some pretty good accolades, and we don't want to gloss that over, because the other thing is it's a lot of work. But at the same, and you're not getting paid, right? You're not on a Better Bus Coalition isn't paying you like $100,000 a year or something to be on there. Tell me about just a little bit of that process, how that went. And I think it's instructive for a lot of us to talk about how you don't necessarily need to be an elected official. You could be a young guy working security downtown, and all of a sudden you're moving a needle and making some real impacts in Cincinnati. And that's pretty cool. So tell me about that experience, and then maybe some of the negatives that have come along with it as well.
Yeah, man. It just, like I said earlier, it kind of fell out the sky because, while working security, I was going to Cincinnati State, taking some classes there. And I feel like I kind of got a brush with activism and kind of in that too. I was a co-founder of a club at Cincinnati State, the Leadership Club. And, we started doing various things in the community and stuff like that. And so, again, like you said, you don't have to be a politician to affect change. You just got to want to put in the work. I do not get paid for it. A lot of people say I got a car or something like that. I got a hidden car and I got a lot of money. No, I'm a regular person. I work downtown for a firm. Not a lavish job or anything like that. You just have to have. For me, it's just having a passion to want to change stuff. And you're right, D. It does come with a lot of haters, I would say. And beyond that, just a lot of negativity and a lot of just vitriol. And just like you said, man, Twitter can be a very toxic place. For me, I try not to take this stuff personal. Even though it's very hard, it's easier said than done. Trust me, it is. But when I go to sleep at night, man, I know that that day I fought for the right things, and I'm fighting for the people. And if I keep this about the people and not make it about myself, then I'll be in good shape. But it's bigger than me. You know, Man, I live in Northside. My bus runs every 15 minutes. Why should I care if the rest of the system, thrives or not? I'm good to go. But it's bigger, than just Cam Hardy. It's about people out there who are in places where they cannot advocate for themselves, and they desperately need this stuff. So, you think about those things, you keep the people in the forefront, and that's really how you overcome all the outside noise and keep yourself humble.
No, I love it, man. That's words of wisdom to live by, right there. So, tell me, like along those similar lines, just tell me a little bit more about what's going on in terms of Better Bus Coalition. What's some of the things? Because I know now, because I'm on Twitter as well and seeing what you've got going on, and some of the other organizations. Not only coordinating here and trying to work with Tank and things like that, but there's other groups around the state of Ohio that have really kind of blossomed over the last few years. I remember a few Januaries ago, I was up in Cleveland. And it was cold as hell up there in January. We're having this protest because they're blocking off public square because they don't like the buses there. And it went up there and raised hell, and finally their mayor overturned that decision so the buses could go back. But so Clevelanders for Public Transit, organizations like that. There's a new one that's come up in Columbus now. Are you starting to get this sense of this kind of grassroots effort, not just here in Cincinnati, but elsewhere? And where are some of the places like you've gotten calls from, or they're having you come and talk about? Because I mean, it's almost where nobody was talking about this stuff. I was talking about it a little bit, and then you kind of took it to the next level. How is that kind of when people are taking notice, like what's going on there that we could, get some learning from? So where have you gone, or you're hearing this stuff go on?
Man, that's a great question. And shout out to Clevelanders for Public Transportation. They are doing some wonderful work in Cleveland. I sit on a call with Clevelanders for Public Transit with probably about 100 other bus advocate and other transit organizations across the United States weekly. And so we are constantly sharing a lot of information and what's going on, and how we can advocate for and support each other. The enthusiasm around making public transportation better, the support for that is huge, and not just in Cincinnati, Hamilton County. Of course, we have a lot of people, locally who are very excited about making transit better. But let me tell you, man, like there are some other. We thought that Cincinnati Metro was having a hard time, as far as getting revenue and stuff like that. Would you imagine a place like Miami having bad public transportation? When people go to Miami, do they think about public transportation?
No, no, and that's another example where it's a city kind of based around a car culture.
Yeah.
So it's that history. And we see it in cities across the U.S., especially in the Midwest. But then there's cities that surprise you. Like, for example, I always use the example of Kansas City. Probably, if anybody's ever been to Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas, it's probably one of the most similar cities to Cincinnati that there could be. It's a Midwest river town. It just so many similar size or a little bit bigger there. But they're doing like super progressive stuff there, like taking the whole transit system to free fares, things like that. We can't seem to manage that for a week here, which that's a sore subject right now as well. So we're seeing it in other cities, and it's not just on the crazy coast, and it's not just in Tokyo, in Paris and places like that. But it's places like Kansas City and Milwaukee, and if anybody, Pittsburgh, everybody, we all hate the Steelers. We get that, whether you're Cincinnati, Cleveland, or points in between. But you go there, and they are everywhere. It's just run of the mill. They got nice, bus stops. They got this. They got a lot of people don't even know Pittsburgh has a subway, for crying out loud. And there's a lot more to be done. But you go other places, and this stuff, it just works. It just has. It's part of you we don't even realize.
Yeah. And to answer, the other part of your question, as far as like, traveling around and talking about this stuff and who's been calling and stuff like that, it's been great because, while I've been able to teach, people about this stuff and talk to different organizations, and you mentioned Pittsburgh, they have a very, very active riders coalition, and like they're doing amazing work there as far as trying to make sure that they keep improvements going and stuff like that. But I've been able to learn too. You think about Nashville, for example.
Yeah.
I was able to go to Nashville and talk to council members who were on the council at the time of the referendum, and what they were going through, and how what they're trying to do now. I've just read recently that they're trying to reform and trying to get something back on the ballot. So I've too been able to learn and just gravitate. It's been really good. I never thought that I never thought that my fascination for this would like I said, turn into activism. But I have learned so much and continue to learn so much from this, man. And it's really fun. It's fun stuff.
Well, that's awesome, and I think it's one of our another one of our challenges that we have here, maybe even culturally a little bit, is that we're arguing amongst ourselves and each other. Like, let's see what's going on elsewhere. Maybe we can even lead on some stuff and be out front of everybody. But at least let's look and see what's going on in other places. And we're talking. This is not crazy stuff here. This is stuff that goes on in other places in very similar cities. So I think it's fantastic that you're going out there and doing this stuff on your own dime and going and traveling around. I mean, you could be just sitting home watching Netflix, like we're kind of all stuck doing now. But you're out there and going and seeing and comparing and looking at best practices at other organizations. That's awesome, and I think it's really to the benefit not only on this topic but many topics. Let's look around and see what's going on elsewhere. It's a big world out there, and how can we improve? And maybe when you establish those connections, they see some things that we're doing, and we kind of work together or share on these things, and everybody's better off.
I absolutely agree. When I went to Boston and seeing all those bus lanes, it got me fired up. I mean, why can't we have bus lanes here in Cincinnati? And you asked about the Better Bus Coalition. You're going to see our bus lane discussion really ramp up after issue 7, after the conclusion of our election and stuff like that. We want more bus lanes. We think that the one downtown is doing a great job. Enforcement has gotten a lot better. Believe it or not, enforcement has gotten a lot better. We had to hammer them about it, but it has gotten a lot better. And so we want to replicate that across the city. So be on the lookout for that, D.
I love it, and especially like I'll say about a bus, whether it be bus lanes, bike lanes, or any of the rest of it. Don't spare the paint. You see that in other places. I've seen it in my travels, and they paint it, and so everybody has a clear picture. Like, oh, I didn't know there's some sign back there somewhere. I didn't even see it because the street just looks exactly the same as it always has. So I didn't even know it was a bus lane. So I mean, when you do things and offer people visual cues, right? But it comes down to this. And I've heard this statement made: paint's really expensive. For that, and it is literally not. And it's just frustrating when we're just down
Right.
before the current situation and everything's on such a shoestring that we can't even afford paint because it's so expensive, for crying out loud. I mean,
If we always told the city, if you guys don't want to buy it, my coalition will fundraise the money and we will paint it ourselves. It will cost $0 to the city. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the excuses are just not acceptable.
yeah. And one of the things that we're seeing now, and this kind of ties into that bigger picture of like complete streets, and we're talking about better crosswalks and all of those kinds of things. But we see, and one of the points I've been trying to make recently is, the streets are public spaces. It used to be back in the old days, really, before when the automobile first coming on the scene, our cities were designed around public transportation, right? With the old street cars we had 250 miles of, but that's how the city was designed. And so we've seen, over time where the cars, and now it's like you try and take away one parking spot and it's about to have a riot about parking or taking a lane, or the Liberty Street Road diet that we had to fight for 7, 8 years. It took forever to do that. How so much? This is a public space. It's not a rule that says this is just cars. And people use. We have over 20% of our households in the city of Cincinnati that are car free. People want to live these days more and more, which is how we designed in the first place for walkable neighborhoods, not only downtown, but out in the neighborhood business districts. And, just last fall, we had the lines of kids at Hyde Park Elementary almost getting run down. And so now, especially since a lot of the cars are gone under the current condition, we see just how much space is out there.
Right.
And so we're not talking about getting rid of the cars, but we're just talking about, okay, there are other modes of transportation that we rely on here in Cincinnati and that we want to promote even more. And grandma needs to be able to cross the street, not get run down. And so, we need to start thinking about these things. And again, like you mentioned, when you go to other cities, you see that they're doing it. And there's so many benefits. We're saving lives, where it's benefits to the climate. If we can increase transit ridership, you're reducing air pollution. We have some of the worst air pollution in the country here in Cincinnati. There's all these positive outcomes, and at the end of the day, the cars are still going to get from point A to point B. People are going to be able to get where they need to go. It's just a more equitable solution to where all the modes are able to play a role. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that, my friends.
Good stuff, man. Let me. I'm going to take a look at the comments real quick. If anybody last minute wants to drop a question in here, you're welcome to. But just want to give a shout out to Gabe Davis, who stopped by early on. I don't know if Gabe is still there, and says he's here with two of his faves. Thanks for keeping the advocacy and activism going. So we appreciate that, Gabe, running for Hamilton County Prosecutor. Gerald Checo stopped in. Cam, you were an exemplary leader, doing the necessary work without ego. Absolutely. So that's a great comment. Thanks, Gerald. Kerry Bloom, who I had on the show the other day, running for Hamilton County Juvenile Court Judge, stopped by and said, "What's up?" And our buddy Rick Dottie stopped by and said, "What's up?" So always good to hear Dottie, retired former Metro operator. So yeah, man. With that, we kind of start to wrap it up. These just somehow just naturally go to an hour. I don't know how that works out. We're at 56.
Yeah.
Don't plan it. It just kind of naturally goes that way. But any closing comments? Anything about issue 7 you want to leave folks with? We got a small amount of time, and just kind of where do we go from here? What's the next steps?
Well, what we want to do is make sure that we are reaching as many voters as we can to remind them that there's still an election going on and there is a way that you can vote. All voting is by mail. And so if you want, the Better Bus Coalition that's hosting a call of action on Saturday. I was just on a meeting before this conversation with my team about this. And so we're having a day of action Saturday. So reach out to me via email, cam@betterbuscoalition.org. If you want to be put on the list, basically, we're going to make some phone calls to voters, and we can send you a list, a call list, and you can make them from your couch or wherever, and just remind. We'll send you some scripts, and just remind voters that there's an election.
Right. No, that's a great point. For people that still need to order their ballot, they can do that. They can call the BOE, or you can download and print out the ballot request form. A lot of people have done that, gotten their ballots, and haven't mailed them back yet. So please, everybody, take a moment. If you have a ballot, make sure you get it filled out, get it back in the mail, or there's a drop box outside the BOE. I believe it's 4100 Smith Road in Norwood, if I'm not mistaken. And get those ballots back, and please vote yes on issue 7. And so with that, Cam, thanks, man. I know you're a busy dude. Like we said, you're not getting paid for any of this. You're getting paid almost as much as I am for doing this stuff. But Joyce Powdrill,
right.
The big bucks here, big bucks. Joyce Powdrill stopped by and said it's very informative, and thanked us all the way from Roselawn Bond Hill Collaborative up there. So thanks for that, Joyce. Cam, I appreciate it, man. We'll let you go so you can get a little R&R, and keep up the good work, everything that you're doing. I appreciate it. The city of Cincinnati appreciates it. The region's going to appreciate it, hopefully, when we pass issue 7. So thanks, man.
Thank you, man. Yes, on issue 7. Talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good. Take care.